The day my husband Chris and I packed up our lives and moved to South Dakota, I truly believed we were leaving stress behind. Our oldest son had just turned 6, and after years of living on the East Coast, surrounded by crowded streets, impossible traffic, and careers that consumed every waking hour, we wanted something different, something quieter, something simpler. A place where our children could ride bicycles without us constantly looking over our shoulders, where neighbors actually knew each other's names, where the nights were silent enough to hear crickets instead of sirens. We found exactly that. A small town surrounded by endless farmland and open skies. The house wasn't fancy. It was old, affordable, and sat on one of the friendliest streets we'd ever seen. Most of our neighbors were retirees. Every afternoon they sat on their porches, waving at passing cars with warm smiles that made us feel like we'd lived there our entire lives. Settling in happened faster than either of us expected. Chris quickly made friends through his cousin who lived nearby. Within weeks, he had become one of the locals, spending evenings playing pool, fishing in forgotten rivers, and talking football with people he'd only just met. I wasn't jealous. Well, maybe just a little. Making friends wasn't nearly as easy for me. Between raising 2 children and working part-time at the DMV, my days became a routine of paperwork, school pickups, cooking dinner, and collapsing into bed before I had time to think. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I came home from work and noticed a woman standing on my front porch. She had just rung the doorbell when my car pulled into the driveway. She turned around with the brightest smile I'd ever seen. Not just the kind that moved someone's lips. Her entire face smiled. Even her eyes laughed. She waved enthusiastically. "Hey, neighbor," she called. "I heard a rumor another mom moved into the neighborhood." I laughed. "I'm afraid the rumor's true." She introduced herself as Mallory. Everyone simply called her Mal. She lived 4 houses down with her husband Ali and their 3 children. Without even asking, she started helping me carry groceries inside as if we'd known each other for years. That afternoon stretched into hours. We sat in my kitchen drinking coffee while our kids chased each other around the living room. She told me she used to work in graphic design for a brewery before becoming a stay-at-home mom. Now she only picked up the occasional freelance project whenever she found the time. "I swear," she admitted, laughing, "the hardest part isn't the kids. It's the boredom. The same walls, the same routines, the same conversations every single day." Then she leaned closer with a mischievous grin. "Sometimes I wish the old lady across the street would keel over." I nearly spit out my coffee. "What?" "So I could at least meet the ambulance crew." We burst into laughter. She shook her head. "I'm serious. Get a hobby, get a job, do anything. Just don't let yourself get trapped inside your own house." Before she left again. For the first time since moving, I had a real friend. Over the next few weeks, our families became inseparable. Our children practically lived in each other's homes. There were backyard water balloon fights, family dinners, movie nights, sleepovers, birthday parties. Everything happened together. Mal's husband, Ali, was polite, intelligent, and a little overly formal, but kind enough. Chris got along with him surprisingly well. One Friday evening, they invited us over for dinner. Mal had spent hours making homemade spaghetti and meatballs, while Ali transformed the living room into a giant game room using a projector screen for the kids. The adults eventually drifted outside with glasses of white wine, while the children laughed somewhere inside. The night air was warm, peaceful, almost unnaturally quiet. That's when Mal asked me something strange. "Do you believe in ghosts?" I shrugged. "Not really." "What about haunted places?" "Monsters?" I laughed. "Only in movies." She didn't laugh back. Instead, she stared into the darkness across the fields in her backyard. Then she lowered her voice. "You ever hear about the fog?" "The fog?" She nodded slowly. "There's something in it." I smiled, expecting a joke. She didn't smile. After reading every article I could find, I spent the next several days messaging Mal almost nonstop. Every spare minute at work, every quiet moment after putting the kids to bed, and every coffee break turned into another conversation about the strange disappearances. I wanted answers. Who was the young woman who vanished during her morning run? Had anyone ever found a clue? Was there a suspect? Had the police uncovered anything they hadn't shared with the public? Mal answered every question as honestly as she could. The official theory, she texted one evening, is that someone she knew was waiting for her. It made sense. The woman had followed the same jogging route every morning. Anyone watching her routine would have known exactly where and when she'd be alone. But that explanation left too many loose ends. Other people had vanished over the years under almost identical circumstances. One case involved an abandoned pickup truck sitting in the middle of a country road. The driver's door was hanging open. The engine was still running. The driver was never found. According to Mal, several people who called the anonymous tip line all described seeing the same thing. A lone figure, standing perfectly still, half hidden inside the fog. Nobody agreed on what they had actually seen. Some insisted it was a tall man. Others claimed it looked unnaturally thin. A few refused to describe it at all, saying only that looking at it made them feel wrong. There weren't many disappearances, only a handful spread across nearly a decade. But every report shared one detail: dense morning fog, missing people, and witnesses describing something that should never have been there. Mal eventually invited me into a private online group the locals jokingly called Fog Watch. At first I hesitated. Joining a chat dedicated to ghost stories and blurry photographs sounded ridiculous. Curiosity won. The group was surprisingly small: a few retired neighbors, a young farm worker, two middle-aged men who loved local folklore, and of course, Mal. Most conversations had nothing to do with monsters. People shared weather updates, neighborhood gossip, missing pets, and the occasional bad joke. But buried among those ordinary posts were dozens of photographs: fog drifting across empty fields, tree lines disappearing into white, country roads fading into nothing. Most images looked completely normal, until you stared a little longer. Every now and then, your imagination would begin to betray you. A darker shape near a fence, a silhouette between trees, something that could have been a person, or could just as easily have been a shadow. One comment caught my attention. "It screams," someone had written. "Not like a person, not like an animal. Whatever it is, it sounds like it's trying to remember how humans cry." The sentence stayed with me long after I closed the app. A few days later, I called Mal. We talked for over an hour. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to the same subject. "You really believe there's something out there?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I believe people keep disappearing." "That doesn't mean there's a monster." "No," she admitted, "but it means something is happening." I laughed nervously. Maybe everyone just wants a good ghost story. "You've never noticed?" she asked softly. "Noticed what?" "The fog doesn't make people curious. It makes them afraid." Her words lingered with me, even after we hung up. Late July arrived with the thickest fog I'd ever seen. I was driving to work before sunrise when the white mist swallowed the highway. The world beyond my windshield simply vanished. Street signs disappeared. Telephone poles faded into pale outlines. Even my headlights struggled to push through the heavy blanket hanging over the road. I slowed to barely more than walking speed. The familiar open fields beside the highway had vanished completely. It felt less like driving through weather and more like entering another world. Then my front tire dropped off the pavement. A loud pop echoed beneath the car. I slammed on the brakes. Flat tire, perfect. I climbed out and immediately realized I couldn't change it myself. I called Chris, who promised he'd be there as quickly as possible. With nothing to do but wait, I remembered Mal's stories. Smiling to myself, I lifted my phone and slowly scanned the empty fields. Part of me hoped I'd catch something strange on camera. Anything. A shadow. A movement. Something to laugh about later. The camera found nothing, but my body did. A deep chill settled inside my chest. Not the kind caused by cold weather. It felt as though icy fingers had reached into my lungs. Every breath became heavier, more difficult. I lowered the phone. That's when I heard it. Not a scream. Not exactly. A long, rasping, broken sound drifting somewhere across the invisible field. It vibrated through the fog like someone trying to cry out after forgetting how. Every hair on my arm stood up. I couldn't see a single thing, but I knew. Empty fields, hoping not to see anything. yet secretly expecting to. I never told Chris how much it was getting to me. He knew I had heard something that day beside the road, but he blamed it on stress. A new town, a new job, two young children, and endless responsibilities. He thought my imagination had simply filled in the blanks. I wanted to believe he was right, but something deep inside me refused to let it go. The online group became more active as the mornings grew colder. Every few days, someone uploaded another blurry photograph or another strange story. Most of them were easy to dismiss, until the disappearances started again. An elderly farmer failed to return home after checking his livestock before dawn. His truck was found parked beside an open pasture. The driver's door stood open. The keys were still in the ignition. His boots were lying in the wet grass several yards away. There were no footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle, no blood. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. The sheriff called it another missing person case. The people in Fog Watch called it another warning. That night, sleep refused to come. I kept replaying the strange sound I'd heard outside my car. The longer I remembered it, the less it sounded like an animal. It sounded human, only broken, like someone trying to speak through frozen lungs. The next morning, Mal knocked on my door before sunrise. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes, and her braid was tied together in a hurry. "I heard it," she whispered before I could say a word. My stomach tightened. "When?" "Last night." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. I was letting the dog out before bed. The fog rolled across the yard, and I heard something call my name. I stared at her. My actual name. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked the question I had been afraid to hear answered. "What did it sound like?" She swallowed hard. "My mother's voice." A chill raced across my skin. Her mother had died almost 10 years earlier. "You're sure?" She nodded slowly. I almost walked into the yard. For the first time since moving to town, I saw genuine fear in Mal's eyes. Not excitement, not curiosity, fear. That afternoon, we decided enough was enough. If there was someone hiding in the fog, we wanted proof. If there wasn't, then maybe we'd finally convince ourselves we had imagined everything. Chris helped us borrow 2 old trail cameras from one of his friends. We mounted one beside the tree line behind Mal's house. Another faced the abandoned field near the old gravel road where several people had disappeared. For 3 nights, nothing. The cameras recorded raccoons, deer, owls, a curious fox that sniffed the lens before wandering away. By the 4th morning, I started feeling foolish. Maybe Chris had been right all along. Then the 5th night arrived. Around 4 in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was Mel, no message, just one word. Now. I threw on a jacket and rushed outside. The cold hit me immediately. The entire neighborhood had disappeared beneath an ocean of white. Streetlights glowed like distant stars trapped inside clouds. Even the sound of my own footsteps felt muffled. Halfway down the driveway, I heard it. A child laughing, soft, faint, impossible. My youngest son was asleep inside the house, yet the laughter drifted through the fog only a few yards away. Then it stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. Every instinct screamed at me to go back inside. Instead, I kept walking. Each step made the air colder. My fingers became numb. The fog wasn't simply surrounding me anymore. It felt alive. It pressed gently against my skin as though it were breathing. Then I noticed footprints, small ones, bare feet. They crossed the road and vanished into the white. I followed them without thinking. 10 steps, 20, 30. Suddenly, every sound disappeared. No wind, no birds, no insects, nothing. The world had gone completely silent. Then something moved, not ahead of me, beside me, a shadow, tall, perfectly still. It wasn't walking, it wasn't standing. It simply existed within the fog. The outlines shimmered like smoke trying to imitate a human body. Its edges rippled as though thousands of tiny threads were unraveling into the mist. I couldn't see a face, only darkness. Then it slowly lifted one arm and pointed directly at me. My chest exploded with icy pain. The same unbearable cold spread through my lungs. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Somewhere behind me, I heard Mal scream my name. The shadow dissolved instantly. The fog surged forward like a crashing wave. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my front porch. When I slammed the door shut behind me, I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Chris came running downstairs, demanding to know what had happened. I tried to answer, but only one sentence escaped my lips. It's watching us. And deep down, I knew it had been long before we ever noticed it. After that night, everything changed. I stopped opening the curtains before sunrise. The fields that had once looked peaceful now filled me with a dread I couldn't explain. Every morning, the fog drifted over the hills like a living thing, silent and patient, as though it knew we were watching. Chris tried to reassure me. He insisted the figure I'd seen was nothing more than a trick of the light, that panic had distorted my senses. He even laughed when I suggested packing up and leaving town. But his smile disappeared the following week. The trail cameras finally recorded something. It wasn't much. At first glance, the footage showed nothing except an empty field buried beneath thick white fog. Then the timestamp froze. 1 second, 2, 3. The image began to flicker. A dark silhouette slowly formed in the center of the frame. It didn't walk into view. It simply appeared. Its body looked vaguely human, but the edges shifted constantly, unraveling into ribbons of mist before pulling themselves back together. Every few seconds, the figure seemed to grow taller, then smaller again. The camera's microphone captured a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. It wasn't speaking. It wasn't screaming. It was trying to imitate voices. For a split second, it sounded like a crying child, then an elderly woman, then a man calling for help. The voices overlapped until they blended into one impossible, distorted howl. The recording ended abruptly. The camera shut itself off. No battery warning, no error, just silence. We showed the footage to the sheriff. He watched it twice before handing the memory card back. Probably moisture interfering with the electronics, he said. His words were calm. His hands weren't. They were shaking. That evening, Mal came to my house. Neither of us spoke much. We simply sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees. "I think it wants us to follow it," she whispered. I nodded. "I think it wants more than that." The air suddenly became still. Every insect stopped singing. The wind died. Then the fog began rolling toward us. Not from one direction, from every direction. Within seconds, our entire street vanished behind a wall of white. Chris rushed outside with a flashlight. The beam barely reached a few feet before it disappeared into the mist. Then we heard it. "Mom." It was my oldest son's voice, coming from somewhere across the road. I turned toward the sound instinctively. Chris grabbed my arm. "Our son's upstairs," he whispered. The voice came again, closer this time. "Mom, help me." My heart shattered. Every instinct as a parent told me to run toward that voice. Every instinct to survive told me not to move. Mal covered her ears. "It's lying," she cried. "It isn't them." The fog answered with dozens of voices, children, parents, friends, all calling for someone they loved. The neighborhood erupted into confusion. Doors opened. People shouted names into the darkness. Flashlights danced through the mist. Then, all at once, every voice stopped. The silence that followed was worse, much worse. The fog lingered for several minutes before slowly retreating across the fields. When dawn finally broke, the street looked normal again. Almost. One house stood open. Its front door swung gently in the morning breeze. Inside, breakfast was still cooking. Coffee sat warm on the table. A television played quietly in the living room. But the family who lived there had vanished. Not a single trace remained. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, nothing. By the end of that month, Chris had accepted what I already knew. We packed everything we owned. The house sold at a loss. Neither of us cared. Some things aren't worth understanding. Some places aren't meant to be explored. As we drove away, I looked into the rearview mirror one last time. The fog rested over the distant fields exactly as it had on the day we arrived. For just a heartbeat, I thought I saw someone standing inside it, watching us leave. I never told Chris. Years have passed since then. I've lived in cities, small towns, and places where the mornings are bright and clear. Yet whenever I wake before sunrise, I still find myself listening, waiting. Sometimes on the coldest mornings when mist gathers outside my window, I hear something so faint that I almost convince myself I imagined it. A distant voice, barely louder than a whisper, calling my name. I never answer, because I learned one lesson that town taught far too well. If something calls to you from inside the fog, make sure it belongs to the... I told myself I would never think about that town again. For years, I kept that promise. The scars on my arm slowly faded into thin white lines. Therapy helped with the nightmares. Chris and I settled into a quiet life in another state, and our children grew older without remembering much about the place we had fled. Or at least that's what I believed. Then, on an icy November morning, my oldest son asked me a question that made my blood run cold. Mom, I looked up from my coffee. Do you remember the fog? The mug slipped from my hand and shattered across the kitchen floor. He stared at me, confused. I had a dream about it, he continued. There was someone standing outside my window. I forced a smile, trying not to panic. It was just a dream. He shook his head. No. He knew my name. That night, I barely slept. At 3 in the morning, I found myself standing by the bedroom window. A thin layer of mist drifted across our backyard. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening. Yet my heart pounded exactly as it had all those years ago. I kept hearing Mal's voice. It wants us to follow it. The next afternoon, my phone rang. I almost ignored it. The number was unfamiliar. When I answered, there was only silence. Then, a raspy breath. Not human, not mechanical, just breathing. Slow, patient, waiting. The call disconnected. Over the next week, it happened 4 more times. Always at dawn, always silent, always ending with that same impossible breath. I finally changed my number. The calls stopped, but the dreams didn't. Every night I stood in the middle of endless white fog. Every night I saw the same silhouette waiting in the distance. It never moved. It never spoke. It simply watched. Until one night, it smiled. I woke screaming. Chris turned on the light immediately. He asked what I'd seen. I couldn't answer, because for the first time, I had seen its face. There wasn't one. Only shifting white mist where eyes, a mouth, and skin should have been, as though the fog itself had learned the shape of a person but not the details. A week later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the old gravel road outside our former neighborhood. The picture had clearly been taken recently. Everything looked exactly as I remembered, except for one detail. Standing beside the abandoned fence was a woman. Even from behind, I recognized the long braid. Mal. Written on the back of the photograph were 4 words. It never followed you. You followed it. I called her immediately. The number had been disconnected years ago. I searched social media. Nothing. County records listed her as having moved away after her husband's disappearance. No forwarding address, no employer, no trace. It was as though she had vanished twice. Sometimes I wonder if leaving that town actually saved us, or if we simply carried a piece of it away. Because every winter, when the mornings grow cold enough for fog to gather outside my home, I still hear footsteps. Not outside, inside, soft, slow, moving through the hallway before sunrise. I've searched every room, every closet, every corner of the house. There's never anyone there.